Scary telling.
I had been sentenced to death, but I had accepted my fate. Hanging, decapitation, these were punishments that I had heard about and even witnessed. They were relatively quick, perhaps even painless. But as I was led through the streets towards the town square, I couldn't shake the feeling that something much worse was in store for me. As I approached the center of the square, I saw it, the copper bowl. It was an ancient device, used for torture and execution in times past. I had heard tales of it, of its menacing appearance and its ability to roast its victims alive. But I had always thought those stories were just that, stories. Now, as I stood there, watching the guards unveil the bowl, I knew that the tales were true. The bowl was a solid piece of copper, large enough for a man to stand inside, with a door that could be locked from the outside. The guards forced me towards the bowl, their hands like iron grips on my arms. My heart was pounding in my chest as I felt the cool copper surface against my skin. I tried to back away, but the guards were too strong. "Get inside," one of them growled, shoving me forward. I hesitated for just a moment before stepping inside the bowl. The door was closed behind me, and I was plunged into darkness. At first, I could barely see anything. But as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could make out the outlines of my surroundings. The walls of the bowl were smooth and cold, and the air was still. I stood there for what felt like hours, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. I was alone, trapped inside the copper bowl, waiting for my inevitable fate. The longer I stood there, the more I began to feel the heat. It started as a subtle warmth, barely noticeable. But it grew more intense with each passing moment, until I could feel the sweat starting to trickle down my face. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but my heart was racing. I had heard that the bowl could get incredibly hot, hot enough to roast a man alive. And I couldn't shake the feeling that that was exactly what was going to happen to me. The heat inside the copper bowl continued to grow until it was almost unbearable. I could feel sweat pouring down my face and neck, and my breathing became labored. I tried to push against the walls of the bowl, hoping to find some way out, but there was no give. It was a solid piece of copper, with no cracks or seams for air to seep in. I called out for help, but my voice echoed back to me, muffled by the thick metal walls. I was trapped, alone and helpless. As time passed, the heat grew more and more intense. It was like being inside an oven, with no way to escape. My throat became parched, and I struggled to breathe. Each breath felt like it was getting shallower and shallower. I wondered how long I had been inside the bowl. It felt like an eternity, but in reality, it couldn't have been more than an hour. Still, the longer I was trapped inside, the more hopeless I felt. I tried to stay calm, to think of a way out. But there was nothing I could do. The guards had locked me inside, and there was no one to help me. I was alone with my thoughts and fears. As the heat continued to grow, I began to feel lightheaded. My vision started to blur, and my limbs felt heavy. It was like being in a dream, a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I heard the sound of metal clanging against metal. I froze, listening intently. At first, I thought it was just the guards checking on me, but the sound was too persistent. It was like something was moving inside the bowl with me. My heart began to race, and I backed up against the wall, as far away from the sound as I could get. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it couldn't be good. The sound of metal scraping against metal grew louder, and I realized that there was something else in the copper bowl with me. My mind raced, trying to imagine what kind of horror could be waiting for me in the darkness. I tried to feel around the inside of the bowl, hoping to locate the source of the sound, but my hands found nothing but smooth, cool metal. The sound seemed to be coming from behind me, near the door of the bowl. I pressed myself as tightly as I could against the opposite wall, hoping that whatever it was, it wouldn't come any closer. But then, I felt something brush against my leg. I cried out in terror, unable to control my fear any longer. The thing in the bowl with me began to move more quickly, skittering and scraping against the metal walls. I could hear it breathing, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to keep as still as possible, hoping that it wouldn't notice me. But it seemed to be getting closer, and I knew that I couldn't stay hidden forever. As it drew nearer, I could make out its shape in the darkness. It was like nothing I had ever seen before, a creature made entirely of metal, with razor-sharp edges and gleaming, unblinking eyes. I screamed and tried to push myself even further away, but there was nowhere to go. The thing had me cornered, and I knew that my fate was sealed. But then, something strange happened. The creature seemed to lose interest in me, turning instead towards the door of the bowl. I watched in horror as it began to scrape and claw at the metal, trying to force its way out. It was like it was trapped in the bowl with me, just like I was. For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe if the creature could break free, it could help me escape too. But then, the heat grew even more intense, and the creature's movements became more frenzied. I realized that it too was trapped, just like me, and there was nothing either of us could do to save ourselves. As the heat inside the copper bowl continued to grow, I began to feel as though I was suffocating. My breathing became more labored, and my chest felt tight and constricted. I tried to take deep breaths, but the air inside the bowl was thick and stagnant. It was like breathing in hot, wet cotton, and I could feel myself getting weaker with each passing moment. The creature inside the bowl with me was still struggling, but its movements had become more sluggish. It was like it too was struggling to breathe, to survive in this heat. I wondered how much longer we could both last. The heat was unbearable, like being inside an inferno. The sweat was pouring off me in rivulets, and my skin felt as though it was on fire. I closed my eyes, trying to calm myself, but it was no use. The heat was too intense, too overwhelming. I felt as though I was going to pass out at any moment. And then, the darkness began to close in. It was like being in a tunnel, with the light at the end getting smaller and smaller. I knew that I was dying, that there was no way out. But even in that moment, I couldn't help but think of the creature trapped in the bowl with me. It too was dying, suffering the same fate as I was. I tried to reach out to it, to offer some kind of comfort in our final moments. But my limbs were heavy, unresponsive, and I could feel myself slipping away. In the end, it was like being in a dream. The heat, the darkness, the sound of the creature struggling, they all blended together into a surreal, otherworldly landscape. And then, there was nothing. Just silence and darkness, and the knowledge that I had been defeated by the copper bowl. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I came to, I was still inside the copper bowl. The heat had dissipated somewhat, but the air was still stifling and the darkness still all-encompassing. At first, I thought that maybe I had been rescued, that someone had found a way to get me out. But then, I heard the sound of laughter, the guards, mocking my suffering. It was then that I knew that I was truly doomed. There was no way out, no escape from this fate. I was going to die inside the copper bowl, just like so many before me. The pain came in waves. At first, it was just a dull ache, but it grew more and more intense with each passing moment. My skin was on fire, and I could feel my flesh beginning to blister and peel. I screamed, but it was like my voice was swallowed up by the bull, absorbed by the copper walls. The guards just laughed, taunting me, jeering at my pain. And then, in the midst of all that horror, I saw something strange. It was like a glimmer of light, a small, flickering flame. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, a trick of the mind. But then, it grew stronger, brighter. And I realized that it was coming from inside the copper bowl. I didn't know how it was possible. There was no way that a fire could burn inside the bowl without burning me alive as well. But there it was, growing stronger and stronger, until it was like a furnace, raging around me. The guards were no longer laughing now. They were panicking, trying to figure out how to put out the fire. But it was too late. The flames were like a living thing, consuming everything in their path. I watched, amazed and horrified, as the copper bowl began to glow with an otherworldly light. It was like the metal was melting, becoming liquid, and I knew that my end was near. And then, in the midst of all that chaos, there was a sudden explosion. The copper bowl shattered, sending shards of metal flying in every direction. And in that moment, I was free. I stumbled out of the wreckage, my skin blackened and blistered. But I was alive, and that was all that mattered. As I lay on the ground, waiting for the guards to come and take me away, I realized that the copper bowl had claimed yet another victim. But in its destruction, it had also set me free. And for that,